We're ready to sew this slipcover. We've done all the pin fitting. We have every place where we want seams to be. So today, and we trimmed it carefully to a 1/2 inch because as I take the pins out, I need to be able to trust this cut edge that I did, that it's going to be a 1/2 inch from where I intended the seam to be. So we'll be stitching, inserting welt where we need it, and pulling pins out as we go. So a really important part about making a slipcover is this trimming. And you have to learn what kind of style you have as a slipcover maker. I tend to pin fit fairly tightly and trim exact, so that when I get to the sewing machine, if I have trimmed an exact 1/2 inch seam allowance, but then I start stitching over that, I stitch a 5/8 seam allowance, then my slipcover is going to be too tight. So I pin fit tight and stitch accurately. I've had other friends that make slipcovers that pin fit loose and then will sew loose, and then they end up with a baggy slipcover. You'll learn your style. So today we're going to start the sewing. Last time we made our welt cord. It's all ready to go. It is the 1/4 inch white cording that has no stretch to it, and bias fabric strips that we sewed. The fabric has some stretch to it. Where's my end? Okay. Here's the end. It was cut on the bias so that there's a lot of give in this direction for the fabric, but not the white interior cord. So we'll work on that. We're going to start off the sewing by sewing any unwelted seams. In this case, it'll be our darts that we have up at the upper corner, and this seam with our tuck where the seat meets the inside back. So I'm going to start with the darts. Okay. I need to sew this exactly here, but this pin is in my way and this pin is in my way. So I'm going to take them out. I've notched my fabric, so I know exactly where that seam is going to go and where this seam is going to go. So I can take that away. I've also notched my dart right here, so I could take this pin out, hold it together where the dart notches are, and sew it down. I back tacked here. This is the only place where I'm going to back tack at a dart like this. I'm not going to back tack at the beginning of a seam or the end of a seam, because there will always be another seam crossing it, so I don't have to worry about that. But there's no additional seam crossing here, so I wanted to back tack that and reinforce it. And I leave these tails. I'll deal with them later. Here's my other corner dart. Take the pin out. Push that away. Now I have my dart nice and flat. Okay, darts are done. Here and here. So now this is the seam where the seat meets the inside back. This is where our tuck, where the inside back meets the seat, and then we added this tuck so that we can push it into that crevice. this seam is meeting this side seam. So I made a little notch here. This is where, so I need this to be sewn together, and then later on this seam will come across. So right now this pin is in my way, and this pin is in my way. And I'm going to start my stitching right where I put that notch, and I'm going to reinforce it with a little bit of back tack. This pin is in my way. Look, now they've separated. But I know those notches have to match. So I'm putting my needle down exactly where I need my seam to start. And then we'll take a couple of stitches. I'm going to go back a couple. I'll reinforce that as I come to the next pin. Okay. I can pivot. So even though I roughly chalked this, I trimmed here, so this is where I care. To a 1/2 inch, I pivot. And to a 1/2 inch. Down. Pivoting it out of the way. Right. This is where this seam is coming to here. So I know I need to stop my stitching right at that slash mark. I have to get this pin out of my way, this pin out of my way. See that slash? I'm going right up to the slash, and then I'm backing up. All right, this seam is finished. All good to go. Now you can see how this is my border piece, and this is where it's going to hit the seat, and then the inside back where it wraps around the side. So I can do this seam next. And you can see how I would want to do this seam before I do this seam, because this one is going to cross it. And this will be the seam that goes around to the seat front and back out to the side and to the outer back again. And I want this seam to be welted, have a cording in it. So I'm going to show you how I do these seams. Slipcover sewers have all kinds of techniques to do things. I have my cord. Where's the end? Here's the end. All right. So some slipcover makers put the cording inside and sew this part of the seam, this part of the seam, and the cording all in one pass. They're just slipping this in and then stitching as they go, taking pins out. I find that I don't have enough accuracy, and I want my slipcovers to be snug and well fitted, and I want the seams to be accurate. So what I have come up with, so I've been doing this over 30 years, I make it in 2 steps instead of 1. So I'm going to add my cording to the seat part. Just stitch it on, and then after the cording is in place on the seat, I'm going to attach my border to it. So it means I'm going to take some pins out, but I don't want to lose my orientation. Here's a nice notch. I'm going to push some pins in, about 2 inches in. And you'll see how this will work. So I'll do a few of these. I'm going to take I want to sew my cording onto here, and I'm not sure what's going to happen on this little back piece, but I know my cording has to go all the way there in one piece. So I'm going to leave a tail and then start my cording around here. Here's where the seam, that unwelted seam is. Okay. Now my pieces are together still, so I keep their orientation, but I've pulled this away so I can have room to sew. So I have this carefully notched as I'm approaching the corner, and then after I go around the corner, it's notched again. So I actually could take these pins out and completely separate the 2 pieces, but I want to keep their orientation. Now I can take out a lot of these pins. I know sometimes this seems like a lot of work, doing an extra, oh dear, it hasn't been sewing. Okay, how many times we've sewn and we've lost our bobbin thread? Well, anybody that's sewn has done it. You do, how a foot, 2 feet of seam with no thread in the machine. And you learn and you go back and you do it again. All right, look, oh, it's sewing, how nice. So as I'm approaching, I'm going to put my welt cord around this corner, and in order to do it, I need, this isn't flexible enough, so I have to start slashing. So I usually about 1 inch before I'm going to pivot, I'll make a slash, and I'll make 4 or 5 cuts. And cut up to the thread. It'll be enough for it to move around the corner. Because it's fabric, we don't make sharp turns, because fabric doesn't make, it's not wood, it's not metal. So I'm going to go right to this point, which is exactly a 1/2 inch from this side. I'm going to come into here, and then I'm going to stop with my needle down. One more stitch. Okay. Turn the fabric, pull my cording, and now you can see how it splays open where I slashed. So it was important that I did these slashes. Alright. And I've come to where I have more pins. Be pulling them out, setting them in a ways back. So here's my next pivot. As I'm turning the corner, these pins are going to be in my way. To pull one back. Okay, right up to that 1/2 inch point. Shift everything around. Turn it. All right, down the home stretch. You can see these 2 notches. I'm going to have to make sure that those will match up, but I'll keep this pin here, so I'll keep that orientation. Get rid of these. Oops. Here's a pin. Try not to sew over pins. You'll break your needle, or at the very least dull it. And replacing the needle isn't such a big deal, but a lot of times when you do break a needle, you end up creating a burr on the throat plate, which is a much more expensive replacement. So make sure you get the pins out, don't stitch over them. It's just like you don't want to stitch over or cut over pins either. Alright, so I know this seam is going to go all the way back. I need this cording to go in here, but I'm going to wait. I don't want to just stitch over this. So I'm going to be done with this for now. So I'm cutting this about 1.5 inches longer than what I need. I can now stitch 3/4 of this. And then when I get to this part, I'm going to have to play with it to make sure it fits exactly. But rather than, I want to put these pieces in place. One of the nice things about making a slipcover, or sewing in general, is don't feel you have to do one seam in one pass. You could do it in many passes. I could break this up into 3 sections or 4 sections, whatever I need. All right, but I am ready to do part of this. I'm going to hold off on this tricky part. I'm losing a pin here. So now I'm flipping it, and I'm going to do my corded seam. Now is when I need everything matched up beautifully. Here's a pen. I hope this works. Here's a notch. All right. My cording has no notches in it, and then here's the other notch. I have to make sure that the front piece and the back piece, where those notches are, match. So I put some effort into that, and if I wanted to check it, I could just pin all my layers together and just make sure. Okay, that looks great. So I'm going to start stitching about where that notch is. I have everything in place. When I look underneath, it's all good. When I made my Welch cord, I stitched it out a little bit. When I placed my cord on this piece, I stitched out a little bit. Now for my final stitching, so these are out here, I'm going to stitch in probably about a 32nd of an inch closer to the actual cord. So on this side I can see my stitch line was here, and I'm going to be stitching in just the tiniest bit closer to the cord. And I have to make sure my seam allowance are matched up. That's looking good. I've got a notch here and a notch here. It looks like they're not matching up, but what's happening is I can tug a tiny bit on this piece and it'll make it match up. I know whatever happens in here, I can ease a little of this, but by the time I get to this notch, it has to match with that one, because otherwise my corner won't be good. So I'm gonna put this in. Same thing's going to happen around this corner. Hang on, I need to get a pen that works. Here's a notch, here's a notch. I know by the time I get around here that this piece of fabric has to match that piece of fabric where those pins are. And I can manipulate the fabric. I can be pulling on the bottom or pushing on the top or the opposite. Get to my corner, I'm going to pivot. It looks like they're not going to match up. All right, here's where we do some snug. I'm going to be using my fingers to pull this fabric towards the corner. I'll put that underneath. I'll just keep pulling the top and pushing the bottom. So I have made my notches line up. Where's my next? So after I finished a notch, I have to look, where are my next notches? So I can do one here, here. That's where the next ones are going to be. I know that they have to match. So the bottom is a little bigger, which means it's going to be taken up a bit with those feed dogs. But they're very, very close. You just have to make sure that they're exact. All right. Looks like the pins are matching up. Okay. Same issue is going to happen over here after we turn the corner. Here. Okay, we're matched here. Just have to Okay. Again, I'm going to put my hand underneath and keep pushing the under layer of fabric towards the back so that these pins match up. Ah, I did it. All right. My next notch. Every time I pass a notch, I'm going to be looking for my next one. So this one's here. Where is it on this part? It's over here. These pins can go away. All right. See, it's the same little issue. This one is a little bit longer than this. And this is because of the take up from the feed dogs. So I should be able to handle that. That should just ease in. So now they're less than 1/4 of an inch apart. And just about perfect now. All right, looking good. Looking good. All right. Okay, so we've got 3/4 of this seam done. Let's flip it out and look at it. Nice and tight this is. And I don't see any extra stitch lines. And everything is stitched and it's smooth around these corners. Remember how I had to push, I was pushing this layer in to make it fit. And once it's in place and stitched, it's all looking good. So I'm happy with the way that looks. So I'll flip it back out. Now I have to finish this seam. Right. So I know this is the seat, the inner back, and this is the outer back. I know this cord has to go all the way to the back. And this piece is going to come up here. From this point, for most of the seat, I attach the cording to the seat part and not to the border. For this stretch, because the border is in one piece, I want to attach my cording to the border and not deal with this, where I had to stitch. Because later on when I finish this seam, I want to be able to make some adjustments if I have to. So take this pin out and take a couple of these out. That's the beauty about having these notches. So I can clean stuff up, get it out of my way. On here, now I just have to finish this seam. Typically, I would sew it with the cording side up and then this side down. But I want to be able to watch what happens with this stuff. So I'm going to stitch it from this side. Here's a notch. Okay, with that pin, I want to find out where my notch is on this side. I know this pin has to match up where that pin is. I have to do my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Line up these back edges. Okay. Let's see, I've got a little bit of slack here. I'm just going to fold it into itself. So now the seam is finished. So here's the seam that we just did. This is the one that crossed in, and we had some little bagginess there. So I just pushed it together, and it just worked out just fine. So I'm happy with that. Let's go do the other side. This is the seam I need. Alright, so now I've got this cleaned away that I can use. I'm going to now attach this tail of my cording onto this border piece. So back here. Oops. Mark again where these pins are, these notches. Here's my notch. I also have another notch here that I could orient with. That's over here. So you can see this notch has to match up here, this one here, and I want to stitch as close as I can to this part. And I've almost overlapping about 1 inch from my old stitching line. These pins can come out. Do as much easing on this side as I do on the other. So now the seam is done. My seat is done all the way to the back. I just have one more seam to do, and that's attaching this outside back piece to the inside back. So same technique. This seam is going to this seam is crossing our regular seam. I'm going to set a few pins back so that I keep my orientation about how these pieces fit relative to each other. Again, I choose to do this in 2 steps rather than 1. I know most upholsterers, well, I don't know about most. I know a lot of upholsterers will do it in one pass, but I can be much more accurate. So, leaving the tail there. my notches, I could have taken all of this apart and put it all back together again just by the notches. Coming up to this corner, this is where our dart is. I think this is like the shoulder of the chair. As I'm approaching here, I'm going to make slashes. Across the top. So you can see I only take out pins maybe 6 inches ahead of where I am because I don't want everything to fall apart. This will be more important when you are using many more pieces on a regular armchair. All right, as I approach my corner, I'm going to make slashes. Good. Coming up to more pins in my way. Take them out. To the end. All right, cord is on. Now I can just flip it over and let's stitch this seam. To orient to my pins, or to my slashes, my notches rather. All right, notch here, line up those pins. This thing got unthreaded. That's because I cut the tail too short. But we've all done that. Lining those up again. Alright, where's my next? So, when I put all these notches in, every time a seam was crossing another or I came to something funky happening, I always notched in front of it on the seam and then behind it. So I've got this seam crossing, I've got a notch here, and a notch here. And I've got the corresponding ones up here. So if I stretch this out, when I match this notch up, it looks like this one is off a little bit. And that means that the seam is probably off a little bit. But let me stitch to this notch, and then I'll show you how we can make adjustments. Now, I need these notches to match, so I can do this. I could make a little tiny pleat in here. To just tuck that a little bit where the seam is, where that cross seam is. Because I know I have to make these notches match. Because if these don't match here, then it's only going to get worse further down the seam. So I've got these together. Good. All right. Here's where my notches are. Take these out. All right. Made that knot. These are together. Now I look for my next notch. And it's up near the corner. Looks like those are lined up quite nicely. I don't have to do much pulling or tugging. All right. I got these notches going together. All right. All right, I'm going to stop. I'm going to break this, cut this thread. Because I have to be able to put this dart and deal with it in here. The typical way to deal with a dart, because I have to press this seam allowance to one side or the other. In slipcovers, we never press the seam open. We always press it to one side. It's stronger that way. So, and you have to think about how the dust is going to accumulate in the shoulder of this slipcover. So, let me show you what will happen. I'm going to pin one of these with the seam allowance this way. And we'll just pin it temporarily. I want to show you what happens when we turn it to the outside. So this one, I'm pinning the seam allowance towards the top of the chair. And this one, I'm going to turn it towards the bottom, towards the seat. So this one, I'm pinning the seam allowance that's going towards the floor. This one I've pinned it towards the shoulder of the chair. When I look at them, if I were to flip this, turn this right side out. So now this is my top. This is the very top of my slipcover. This is the inside back, and this is where the outside back is going to be. When I press the seam allowance towards the side, what it does is it creates a little trough here that dust settles in. If I press the seam allowance towards the top, what happens is the trough is coming from the side, and the dust that settles, maybe not in your house, but in my house, will not accumulate in that little crevice because the seam allowance is pushing it away. Here, the crevice is open to the top. On this side, the crevice is open to the side. So every time we have pleat, a dart, or anything like that, we want to position them, the allowances, so that the dirt, so that the crevice is not open to accumulate dirt. So there we go. So, little lesson. So, I need to have my seam allowance go up. So, we're going to go back to stitching this corner. Dart, a notch on this side. Right, so remember we're folding our darts or pleats, whatever happens, up. The allowance goes up so that the crevice would be to the side. Here's my next notch. It's here. There. Oh, those are nicely lined up. These pins out. Looking for my notch over here. Notches are good. There's my next notch. Oh, it's right here. Oh, look at how beautiful those are. We are almost done. Okay, those look like they'll be good. Those are looking good. Now we're going to be covering over this. These can come out. Here's my last notch. Yahoo! All done. Now, take the rest of our pins out and we're going to go try it on the chair. See if all of our work was accurate, see how it fits, if we want to make any adjustments. All of the stitching was done. We're going to flip it out. It's the magic moment. pin. Right, here we go. So we flipped it out. Let's see how it fits. Definitely not baggy. It's snug. That's what I wanted. Gonna pull and tug till all my seams. So see, this is flipping over this way, and this is too far here. Pull on it. Right. That back looks great. I'm happy with the way that looks. Remember we have this extra here that we made that to tuck in. So that'll all go in here. This comes and fits over the top. So here's some extra, but that's all meant to be tucked in. And adjusted. I need this because if someone sits on here, this will pull away, and I need the ease. It's just like the ease you build into if you were making a blouse or a dress. So, here we are. I like the way it looks. I would adjust if I didn't. There might be seams I would want to take apart. That's fine. It's not ideal, but I like this line to be nice and straight across here, but I can feel the bulge in the padding. It's working itself around the bulge. So our last step for today is we've got this on. Decided that I like the way it looks. I'm going to mark for the skirt. And this is just like you're going to be marking for a dress, for a hem. Looks fine. I like the way it looks, and we have to determine where we want the skirt to be. So it's like measuring for clothing. What's a good length? I could have a 2-inch border here, I could have 3, 4, 5, I could have a 6-inch border. That's why I didn't make a decision when I did this. I wanted to see how it looked and what proportion and what would look good. In general, I think anything less than 2 inches is not ideal, because if I pick 2 inches from here, the back of the seat may be lower than here, and I have to have my skirt even. So if 2 inches from here would be about 19, but 19 here, it tapers down to less than an inch. So there's a difference between the front of the seat and the back of the seat. So 2 inches is not great. I could do 3, 4, 5, 6. What if, I don't know, 4-inch would be about here, 5 inches would be here. I think proportionately, I think I'm going to go with about 4.5. So, 4.5 is about here. But I'm going to pick some even number from the floor. So actually, that is exactly 14 inches from the floor. So I'm making sure that the slipcover is on nicely. 14. Again, I want to make sure that the seat is nicely on there. All right, I'm going to put a couple of pins around the back. I'm going to take this to the sewing table. I will chalk mark where my pins are, trim off at a 1/2 inch, and I'll cut more pieces to make the skirt. So next time I'll have the skirt ready to go. We'll put a cording right along where our seam line is, and we'll attach the skirt, and then we're done. This is a quick and easy project. And it makes a whole new chair. So that's it for now. We'll catch up with you again.